Hello, welcome to your first lecture recording. So it's basically very similar to what I do in class. I'm gonna go through the PowerPoint and we're gonna switch to the workbook every now and then I'm also gonna be writing down some note for you I would do in class on the whiteboard. So the videos I try to make them about 10 minutes each. So they are kind of broken down into different sections. You don't have to watch them all at once, just kind of pace yourself. And of course, feel free to pause and get your workbook and stuff. So we're going to be talking about urinary system and the urinary system. Basically, the function is what we call excretion. Okay, so excretion is the removal of various metabolic waste from the body. These metabolic wastes typically are going to end up in your blood, and the kidney's job is to basically take these waste from your blood, and as a byproduct of that, you generate urine. So one of the key things that your kidney filters out would be things like urea. Right? That's actually where the name urine comes from, right? Because it contains these urea, and they are the end product of nitrogenous. They're nitrogenous end product of metabolism in humans, right? A lot of the urea you get from breaking down proteins, for example. There are other ways, right? Like ammonium. Right? Ammonium would be like NH4, also a byproduct of protein metabolism. Creatinine is a waste product that you get from muscle, right? Muscle waste product, right, from the metabolism. And uric acid, it's something that you will get when you break down purines, for example. So you might have heard of the disease gout before. That's when you have built up of uric acid in your body and you cannot get rid of it. They start to build up in your joints, typically like in your big toe, for example, and it's going to hurt quite a bit. It's typically like condition of like older people, right? Like in their 40s, for example. Right? And if you have gout, then you have to cut down on red meat, for example, or alcohol as well, because that will cause the symptoms to flare up, and it's going to hurt quite a bit. So functions of the urinary system. The other functions besides filtering is that the kidney helps maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis, of course, means maintaining an internal balance in the body. So the kidney has a role in that, particularly in maintaining water and salt balance. And when I say salt, I'm talking about sodium chloride, but there are other ion that is going to be balanced out in the kidney as well. So by controlling how much salt is in your blood, you can control the osmolarity, right? We learned that word a long time ago in the beginning of the course. It basically means the concentration of the blood, right? It also plays a role in maintaining blood pressure as well as acid-base balance. So we're going to get to that later on in the lecture. But now let's look at some major structures and organs related to the urinary system. Right? So first of all, you have two kidneys. Okay, here you can see the kidneys is in your abdominal cavity, just under your diaphragm here. And there are a few other things that you might remember. Right? So here you can see this is the inferior vena cava. Of course, that's going to be taking the blood back to your heart. You can see your abdominal aorta over here in this location. And there's a little thing here that's cut away. That is actually your esophagus, right? So you might remember the diaphragm has a hole, the esophageal hiatus. That is where the esophagus is going to go through, and if I have to draw the stomach would be somewhere here. Okay, so your kidneys are right here. The ones on the left, on the right rather, the one on the right is a little bit lower than the one on the left for some reason. So you can think of the kidney as kind of like a bean-shaped structure, and there's going to be a little triangle on top, and that's what this thing is there. So that is your adrenal gland. We're not going to talk about it just yet. It'll come back later on in the lecture. Just kind of know that the adrenal gland sits on top of your kidney, kind of like a party hat that it wears. That is where a lot of the hormones are released, right? You probably are familiar with adrenaline, right? So adrenaline is the hormone that comes from the adrenal gland. So there are other hormones that comes out of the adrenal gland that will be important for the urinary system, particularly when it comes to maintaining homeostasis. So we're going to get back to that later. So back to the aorta here, right? So your heart has the aorta that comes out at the top, and if you remember, that aorta actually arches down, right? And it comes down at the bottom here through the diaphragm into the abdominal cavity, and so that's what this is, right? So once it goes into your abdominal cavity, it actually will branch into the renal artery, and that's going to be supplying blood to your kidney 24/7. Not so much for providing the kidneys with nutrients, but the renal artery is there to supply the blood so the kidneys can cleanse them continuously. Right? So there's quite a lot of blood going through your kidneys. We're talking about up to thousands of milliliter of blood going through the kidneys per minute. So astounding filtration rate there. Once you filter the blood, then they will come back out through the renal vein, which then you will return the blood to the heart through the inferior vena cava. So this whole process is going to generate urine as a byproduct, and the urine is going to come out from each kidney through these tubes that you see here. So there's one tube here, another one here, and we call those the ureter. Okay, so you have two ureters. Okay, and they connect the kidneys to the urinary bladder, which is right here. Okay, urinary bladder. So you will hold the urine in the urinary bladder until you have to go, right? And when you go to the bathroom, the urine will come out through the urethra. Right? So don't confuse the ureters from the urethra. Right? You have two ureters connecting the kidneys to the urinary bladder, and the urethra is basically the tube that connects the urinary bladder to the outside. So obviously, in men, the urethra is much longer because of the anatomy. And here in this female picture, you can see behind the urinary bladder is the uterus, right? The uterus is, of course, where the baby is going to grow if the woman is pregnant. So you probably have heard of this. When woman becomes pregnant, they often have the frequent urge to urinate, and that's because when the baby gets bigger and the uterus is going to enlarge, that's going to apply pressure to the urinary bladder, and as a result, you get that frequent urge for urination. So just to summarize, right, urine is mostly water and contains various dissolved ions, right? So there's Na+, but also potassium, calcium, right, and so on and so forth. And there are other soluble compounds that we don't need in the body, right, like creatinine, like ammonia. And they are produced by a pair of kidneys. The ureters, right, you have two of these, right, two of these will transport the urine from the kidneys to your urinary bladder. This is a one-way trip, okay? Once the urine goes into the urinary bladder, there's no other path for it to go, right? The only way is out of the body. Okay? You cannot reabsorb the urine to conserve water, for example. That's not possible. And of course, when the bladder is full, and the urine will empty to the outside of the body through the urethra. Okay, so that's the part one of the video. We will continue in the next one. Now we're going to move on to the anatomy of the kidney. can you take out your workbook and turn to page 63? Okay, page 63. You can pause the video first, and once you get to page 63, we're gonna label it together just like we do in class. So here you can see that this is your left kidney, and you're looking at it from the front. So you can see that there is kind of like this area that's concave, right? Remember, concave means it's caved in. This concave area where all the blood vessel goes in, where the ureter comes out, right? This indented area, we call that the hilum. H-I-L-U-M, hilum. Okay, so it's just referring to the medial side of your kidney. So you can see there are two blood vessels here going into and out of your kidney. So the one that's bigger over here, that is your renal vein. Okay, renal vein right here. Okay, renal vein. Let's put that down. So that's going to be the blood when it's done filtering in the kidney. It's going to come back out, and it's going to go back to your inferior vena cava. Okay, and then from there it's going to go back to the heart. Now behind it, we can see that there is the renal artery. Okay, renal artery. Of course, the word renal just means it has to do with the kidney. So there is your entire kidney, and when the urine is ready to come out, it will travel through this structure here. So this over here is called the renal pelvis, which is kind of just like the area before it goes and become the ureter. Okay, so of course the ureter is going to take it to the urinary bladder. All right, so that's your entire kidney. Now, if we take the kidney and we cut it open, right? We're going to cut it open with a frontal plane, right? So cut it into front and back, right? It's going to look something like this. So you can see there is a fibrous capsule that goes around the entire kidney, right? So it's a little bit hard for me to color it here, but let me try to do that for you. Right? You can see there's a thin line that go around the entire kidney here. Okay, so that casing kind of protects the organ, right? We call that the renal capsule. Renal capsule. Okay, renal capsule. Now, in the kidney, you will see that there is separated into two portions. Right? The outer portion is what we call the renal cortex. Okay, so cortex generally means the outside of an organ, right? So you remember we talked about the cerebral cortex, right, which is the outside of your cerebrum, right? So renal cortex is the outside of the kidney. Now we're gonna come back to this point later, but I just want to get it in your head right now. The renal cortex, right, compared to the inside of the kidney, is going to have lower osmolarity. And that's kind of important in terms of the function of the kidney. We're going to get back to that later. But for now, just remember the outside has a lower salt concentration, lower osmolarity. Right? You're going to see that we have these little triangle cone-shaped structure, right? So I'm going to outline a few here. Right, so each one of these cone-shaped structure, we call them renal pyramid. Okay, renal pyramid. These little cone-shaped triangle stuff. Now, at the tip of the let me just color the pyramid for you first. Right, so here is the pyramid. Right, that's one pyramid, two pyramid. Okay. Now at the tip of the pyramid, you have another structure. Okay, empty space there. So that little knob at the end, which is what K is pointing at, we call that the renal papilla. Okay, so like if you visualize the cone like this, right? The tip here, that is the papilla. And what happens is the urine are going to be produced in the pyramid, and then they will kind of all drip into the renal papilla. Okay, and then like a melting icicle, right? The urine will come out from the tip of the renal papilla, right? And then I'll tell you where it goes later on. So you don't have the pyramids packed together necessarily, right? They're pretty close, but they're not like, you know, super packed. So for example, here is another pyramid, and you can see there will be space between the pyramids, right? So that space between them, we call them the renal column. Okay. So together, these things, the renal pyramid along with the space between them, that is going to be your renal medulla. Right? So typically, cortex means the outside of an organ, and medulla means the inside of an organ. And you know, again, right, for the purpose of the functioning, the inside of the kidney is going to have higher osmolarity. Okay, so it's important to remember that. Okay, so the urine is going to be produced from the renal pyramid, like I said, and they're going to drip towards the papilla, and from there, they are going to go into these chambers, these cavities over here immediately outside of the renal pyramid. Okay, and that space that's immediately outside of the papilla, we call that the minor calyx. Okay, that's what M is. So minor, okay, calyx. Okay, so calyx is singular, and this is like pointing at two. So the plural is supposed to be calyxes. Okay, so remember, singular is just LYX, and then now we have more than one, so we say calyxes. So there are typically like 2 to 3 minor calyxes outside of the renal papilla, and they would just be collecting the urine that is produced from them. And then outside of that, right, eventually the minor calyxes will converge, they will come together and form bigger space. Okay, so this bigger space outside of that, outside of the minor calyx, is major calyx. Okay, major calyxes. Okay, again, same thing, right? Singular is just with an X, and from there, the urine will go into the renal pelvis and to the ureter. Okay, so this here, right? Renal pelvis rather, sorry, which is the same as this one here. Okay, and from there it's gonna go into the ureter, and of course the ureter is gonna go to the urinary bladder. Okay, don't worry about H. This is just pointing at the space between you know, the various vessels and ureter. We don't have to worry about that. So just to recap, right? In terms of urine formation, right? What do we have? Okay, so urine formation, we're gonna start with the renal pyramid. From there, it's gonna go towards the renal papilla, and then the renal papilla will drip into the minor calyx, right? Minor calyxes. From there, it's going to go into the major calyxes, which then goes into your renal pelvis. From renal pelvis, it's going to go into the ureter. Ureter goes into urinary bladder. And from urinary bladder, it will travel through the urethra out of the body. Okay, and that's the path for now. Okay, we're gonna, of course, as usual, add more to it later on. Okay, that's it for this part of the video. So you should have watched part 2 first, right? Which is where we labeled the kidneys in the workbook. Now we're gonna go through the PowerPoint slides related to the anatomy. So each kidneys, you have 2 kidneys, like I said. They are going to be held together in place by these connective tissue called the renal fascia. You can't see them here, but they're basically masses of fat tissue or adipose tissue that holds the kidney in place. Okay, think of them as kind of like bubble wraps, right? That goes around your electronics when they ship it to you, right? It's kind of cushioning the kidney, protecting it from shock and stuff like that. The kidneys are bean-shaped, kind of reddish-brown in color, not too big, just fist-sized organs. And as we labeled the kidney on page 63 in the workbook, it is covered by a fibrous a connective tissue, which we call the renal capsule. Okay, so don't confuse the renal capsule with the fascia. The capsule, it's the casing of the kidney, very thin, and kind of give it some tough elastic surface. And the renal fascia would be like adipose tissue that are going to be like surrounding the kidneys, kind of like that. And the concave side of the kidney is going to have the medial side, the medial side of the kidney is going to have a concave indentation, right? So that is what we call the hilum, and the hilum is essentially where the arteries go in, vein comes out, as well as where the ureter exit the kidney. So here is a kidney that has been cut open. This is your typical cartoon diagram drawing, and this is what it actually looks like. You can see the darker coloration. That's where the pyramids are going to be. Of course, I'm not going to give you like an actual kidney to label like this, but it's good for you to kind of match it up and see what the real thing it looks like compared to the diagram, right? So here you can see the renal pelvis, the ureter, right? So take some time, right? Go through this diagram yourself. So the kidney function is to filter out waste and excrete the waste in the form of urine. And like I said, there are over 1,000 milliliter of blood, right? 1,200 milliliters of blood approximately going through the kidneys every minute. So you never really stop filtering your blood, right? It's a 24/7 ongoing process, and each of the kidney will receive the blood from the renal artery, right? And as you recall, the renal arteries that goes into the kidneys, they are branching off from the abdominal aorta. So the blood supply is a little bit complicated. I mean, you can study this diagram yourself, but I think the best way to learn it is to actually draw it together. Right, so if you can get a piece of paper out, and we're just going to try to go through this together. All right, let me just draw your typical kidney first. You want to do this kind of big, all right, because we're gonna add quite a lot of stuff to it. So here it's gonna be our kidney, okay, there, right, and this is your hilum. Now I'm going to show you how the blood vessels are going to be split. And every time the blood vessels split, I'm going to switch color to indicate a change, okay, in the blood vessel as split. So based on what we said, right, we have the abdominal aorta, right? Abdominal aorta. So aorta is the direct one that comes out from the heart, but once it enters the abdominal cavity, we call it the abdominal aorta. Right? So the blood comes down, and I'm going to switch color here. Right, I'm going to switch it to green. It's going to branch and becomes the renal artery. Okay, renal artery. Right? And then the renal artery is going to enter the kidney through the hilum, right? And as soon as it's inside, it is going to branch several times. Okay, it's going to branch several times, right, into these things called segmental artery. Okay, so renal artery comes in through the hilum and immediately branches off into smaller ones called segmental artery. Right. So I'm gonna put some pyramids here. Right. There's one pyramid. Okay, pyramid kind of looks like a lemon wedge. This whole picture. Okay, so there are some pyramids. All right, let's fix this one. Some pyramids. Okay, so of course you might have more, right? There are definitely more than 3. But the point is this, right? The segmental artery will now branch again, and it will become these blood vessels that would go along the edge, right, the side of each pyramid. Right, so there's one, there's another one, and they just kind of go up like that. Okay, so same thing here. I'm not going to draw it. Okay, so this thing that goes up along the sides of your pyramid, that is called the interlobar artery. Okay, interlobar artery. Okay, and then eventually they are going to go around the outer edge of your pyramid. Okay, remember this is supposed to be a 3-dimensional picture, right? So they're not necessarily gonna connect, right? One might kind of come out of the page, and then one might go into the page. But for simplicity, I'm just gonna represent them like that. And so this one that's kind of on the outer edge, we call that the arcuate. Right? Arcuate is basically just adjective to describe an arch. Arcuate artery. Okay, arcuate artery. So the arcuate artery is kind of located at the boundary of the renal cortex, right, the outside, and the renal medulla. Okay, so that's kind of at the boundary. Okay, we're almost there. From the arcuate artery, you're gonna have these smaller arteries that will be branching out like that. Okay, so these are gonna go directly into the cortex of your kidneys. Okay, so these are called cortical, because they're in the cortex, radiate artery. Okay, and then it's actually going to branch a few more times, but we are not going to talk about that at this point. We'll come back to it. You just kind of have to believe me. So the blood comes in from the abdominal aorta, and then it goes through all these blood vessels, eventually ending up at the cortical radiate artery. Let's take a look at the PowerPoint slide over here. Right, that's basically what I've drawn. Right, renal artery coming in. Segmental artery here, right? We have the interlobar artery, and then we have the arcuate arteries, okay?
and then something's gonna happen from the RQA arteries. There's gonna be a bunch more branching. Okay, we're not gonna worry about that, but eventually there's gonna be some turning point, and it will become the RQA veins, right? So from the RQA veins, which are these one on the outer edge, they will go back into the interlobar veins, right? Interlobar veins, right? The ones that are on the sides, and then from there, it's gonna go back to the renal veins. Okay, so there is for every artery that we learn, right? The the cortical-radial artery, we're going to have a counterpart cortical-radial veins, right? RQA arteries, we're going to have an RQA veins. So each artery has a counterpart, the veins, corresponding to it, running parallel to it, except for the segmental artery. Okay, so for some reason, like we don't have segmental veins. Okay, they're not called that anyways. So from the interlobar vein, you just go directly into the renal veins and then go back to the inferior vena cava. Okay, so compare this diagram with the one that you've drawn and see, compare them to see the similarities. Here is an other view. Okay, you can see a zoomed in cut of the renal pyramid. Right, you can see the papilla. Papilla is right here. This little tip here, that's going to be draining into, of course, the minor calyx, right, singular X, and on the sides of it, that's where you will find the interlobar veins and artery. On the outer edge, right, the boundary between the cortex and the medulla, right, that's where you will find the RQA artery and veins, and you can see the cortical-radial arteries and veins coming out like that. Okay, so like I said, right, something else is going to happen, but we're going to get to that soon. Okay. This is just a written description of what I have been telling you, so you can read that yourself to see what feeds into what. Okay, now we're going to talk about something called a nephron and its relationship with urine production. So each kidney is composed of over 1 million nephrons. Okay, these are microscopic structures that are basically the functional units of the kidney. So functional unit means they are the smallest unit that is responsible for creating the urine in this case. The best way to visualize a nephron is like a crazy straw. Crazy straw is like, if you order one of those fancy drinks, right? At a restaurant, they sometimes come with like one of those straws that are all twisted up, right? So a nephron is very similar to that. In that, number one, it is all twisted up in the kidney, and number two, it is going to be hollow on the inside. Okay, so the nephron is going to have various parts to it, right? Starting at the Bowman's capsule, right? Proximal tubule, so on and so forth. And so we are going to label the nephron first in a simplified way, and then we're going to add more details to it. So, if you have your workbook, please turn to page 61 of your workbook, and you will find this diagram. So the actual nephron looks more like what's shown on page 62, like this one. Okay, so we're gonna get to that in a bit. Right? It's a little bit overwhelming to label this one right away, so we're gonna start with the simple one over here. All right. So this here is your nephron. Remember, it is hollow on the inside, and I just want to mention at this point, right? The fluid inside the nephron, right? That is what we call the filtrate. Okay, and filtrate is what will becomes urine. Right? So the stuff inside the nephron will eventually become the urine. Right? You can modify the filtrate along the entire length of the nephron, but eventually, right, that stuff is going to come out as urine. So more on that later. So let's go through the different parts of the nephron first. Okay, so here at the beginning of the nephron, there is kind of like a ball shape structure, kind of like a chamber. So this chamber is called the Bowman's capsule. Okay, Bowman's capsule. Okay. Now this blood vessel here is actually not necessarily part of the nephron, okay, but it's gonna be coming together with the nephron at this point. So remember in the previous video we were talking about the blood flow, right? So this is not to scale, but just to help you understand what's going on, right? This would be your pyramid, right? Pyramid, renal pyramid, and you might remember on the outer edge of the renal pyramid there is the arcuate artery. If you don't remember, pause the video, go back and take a look at the diagram we drew. So from the arcuate artery, I was telling you that there are these cortical radiate artery, right? Okay, cortical radiate artery. I'm just gonna call them CRA, cortical radiate artery. So what happens is from the cortical radiate artery, I said there are going to be a bunch of more branching that's going to be happening, right? And so from these cortical radiate arteries, you are going to have more vessels coming off. Okay, so each one of these vessels will feed into one of these Bowman's capsule. Right, so we're going to follow this one. Right, so this blood vessel will take the blood into the Bowman's capsule, right? And this here is called the afferent. Afferent means two words, right? Afferent arteriole. Okay. So the afferent arteriole is going to go inside the Bowman's capsule, where it will become this network of capillaries. Okay. So this capillary network is called the glomerulus. Glomerulus, okay, which means like a ball of yarn in Latin, right? And I'll show you a picture of that later. It actually does look like that. So collectively, right, this is a little bit confusing. Collectively, the maybe I shouldn't do that. Collectively, these two things together, right? The Bowman's capsule, which is the chamber that goes outside, and the glomerulus, right? Together, we call that the renal corpuscle. Okay, so the Bowman's capsule is part of the nephron. The glomerulus is part of the blood vessels, but they happen to be together, right? At this point, and when they're together, we call them the renal corpuscle, right? Like think of like a sausage, right? A sausage inside a bun, right? We call that a hot dog. Okay, sausage, bun, hot dog, right? So the glomerulus is blood vessels, capillaries, basically, and it's very leaky and very high pressure, right? So typically, pressure in capillaries, we might be talking about 20 to 30 mmHg, right? Over here, we're talking about 60 to 90 mmHg. So what happens is when the blood goes into the glomerulus, a lot of the stuff is going to get squeezed out of the glomerulus. Okay, I'm just going to show you like another drawing here. You don't have to draw this, you can just watch. All right, so basically you have the afferent arteriole coming in, and then you would have your network of glomerulus, right? And then it will exit later on. But as the blood goes into the glomerulus, it will squeeze out a lot of fluid, right, from the blood. Okay, you're not squeezing out the blood per se, right? The blood cells, they don't go anywhere, right? But you're squeezing out components of the plasma out of the capillaries, and all that liquid that's coming out needs to be captured, otherwise it's going to leak all over the place. That's what the Bowman's capsule is for. Okay, the Bowman's capsule will capture all these liquid that are coming out, and that liquid will now be inside of the nephron. So we call them the filtrate. Okay, so that's how the blood vessels interacts with the nephron. Okay, so once you capture all the filtrate, right? You're not going to filter everything, right? Some of the stuff is going to still leave the glomerulus, right? And that vessel that's leaving the glomerulus, we call that the efferent, right? Efferent arteriole. Okay. And you know, something happens, and eventually this vessel will come back and join with the cortical radial vein, which will run next to the cortical radial artery. All right, so more on that later. But now let's focus on the nephron, right? So I said a fluid's going to be coming out of the glomerulus. You're going to be capturing it with the Bowman's capsule, and that becomes the filtrate. So now the filtrate will move forward, right, in the nephron. Remember, the inside of the nephron is hollow, right? So this first part of the nephron after the Bowman's capsule, this part that I'm coloring right now, that is what we call the proximal tubule. Okay, proximal tubule. Right. From the proximal tubule, the filtrate will go down this loop, okay, and then come back up. All right, so let me color that for you. This here, on the way down, is called the descending limb, and then on the way up, it is called the ascending limb. Okay, descending limb, ascending limb. Okay, so descending limb, and then this is ascending. Okay, and together, descending, ascending limb, right? That's called the loop of Henle. Loop of Henle. Okay. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, I'm gonna erase this stuff here. If you have it drawn already, that's fine. But I'm gonna erase it and to tell you where exactly is this nephron, right? So this here would be the boundary between the renal cortex and this would be the renal medulla. Okay, so to give you a different perspective, if this is the pyramid, okay, your nephron would be something like this. Okay, so there is the Bowman's capsule. You're gonna have the loop of Henle going in and then coming back out, and then like that. All right, so we are at the loop of Henle right now. Loop of Henle. From the loop of Henle, it's gonna come back out of the medulla into your renal cortex right here. Right, it's gonna come out like that, and this here is your distal tubule. Right, sorry, tubule, B-U-L-E, and from the distal tubule, we're gonna go into the collecting duct. Okay, so you can see this collecting duct actually will go all the way down, So this here is a collecting duct. Right, now I'm just gonna draw another nephron here to show you, right, with a different color. So loop of Henle, go back up, distal tubule, and then collecting duct. Alright, so another one here just to see. Bowman capsule, proximal tubule, loop of Henle, collecting duct. Right? And this triangle, this cone, is of course the renal pyramid. Okay? So that means all these collecting ducts from the millions of nephron, right? Remember, inside of this collecting duct are basically the filtrate, right? And after you go through the collecting duct, you cannot modify the filtrate anymore. So where does that go? Well, that's going to go towards your renal papilla, right? Which is here, renal papilla. And outside of the papilla, you have the minor calyx, Right, so we did this earlier in another video already, right? But let's go through it one more time. From the minor calyx, they converge together to form the major calyxes. And then from that, we go to the renal pelvis. From renal pelvis, we gonna go into the ureter, right? Urinary bladder, urethra, and then out. Okay, so there you have it. Is the basic parts of the nephron. So now let's move on to the more complicated one on page 62. I definitely encourage you to try to label this on your own first before watching the video. So maybe pause it first and do it on your own before watching. In any case, let me highlight the nephron for you here. Right, there's a lot of stuff going on in this picture. But if we highlight the nephron first, maybe it is going to be a little bit easier to see, right? So of course there are the different parts of the nephron, right? But I'm just gonna keep it as one single color. And the inside of the nephron, again, it's hollow. That's where you will have the filtrate. You can modify the filtrate along the way, right, in the proximal tubule, distal tubule, right, collecting duct. But once it leaves the collecting duct, that's it. It's going to be your urine. Okay, so it's a good idea, I think, to trace out the path, right? So you can do that on your own. And see where it all floats. As you can see, it's all twisted up, and that's how it is in the actual kidney. Okay, so number one is part of our nephron. That is the Bowman's capsule. Okay, Bowman's capsule. Okay, from that we are going to go into the next part here, number 13, which is your proximal tubule. Okay, so if you follow the proximal tubule, which is all twisted up, but eventually you're gonna end up in the descending limb, followed by the ascending limb, and together we call that the loop of Henle. So this is going to go back up to number 12, which is the distal tubule. And finally, it's going to go into the collecting duct. So after collecting duct, of course, again, right, going to go to the renal papilla, so on and so forth. Minor, major calyx, so on and so forth. All right, so there is your nephron. Now let's take a look at the blood supply. Yeah, blood supply. It's a little bit hard to figure out what these are. Again, this is not to scale, but I'm just gonna put the pyramid here because once you have the pyramid drawn, right, you can kind of figure out what they are. Right. So I'm gonna use two different shades of red here. Over here, this one. Right. And is going to branch into this one that's going to go across your outer edge, right? This is going to go up, and then it's going to go in to our glomerulus. Okay, so what is that? Well, this one is on the outer edge, so that is going to be our interlobar. Right? And again, if you're not sure if you can follow, just pull back the one, take out the note that we drew, right, and compare it. Right, so interlobar artery, just gonna put A here for short. Right, blood's gonna go up, and then number 6, we have the arcuate artery. right, which is on the outer edge, and from that you're going to have all these little ones that are branching out, right? We call those, number 4, we call those the cortical radial artery. Okay, of course I'm just using short form here, but make sure you know what they are. And from the cortical radial artery, you will have the afferent arterial that will go into the Bowman's capsule. Okay? And inside the Bowman's capsule, it's going to become this network of capillaries. We call that the glomerulus. Okay, and remember, this and this together makes the renal corpuscle, right? The hot dog, right? That we were talking about earlier. Okay, not everything will be filtered at the glomerulus, right? You might have, just 30% coming out, and the rest of it is gonna continue forward, right? And so, if we follow the blood flow, it's gonna go right here, and that would be number 3. Number 3 is the one that's exiting, so that's the efferent arterial. Okay, now this part is going to be a little bit complicated, so I'm just gonna pause the video and color that first and then resume. Give me a second. Okay, so there, it's colored now. Now this efferent arterial will actually open up into another network of capillaries, and this is what we call the peritubular capillary. Okay, let me label it for you. Peritubular capillary. Okay, so peri means next to, right? And tubular, the tube that they're referring to here, is the nephron. So basically, it's a network of capillary that is always going to be next to your a nephron. Okay, so to just give you a preview of what's going to be happening is this. You're going to have your nephron here. And next to it, you're going to have your peritubular capillary. Okay, so in the nephron we have the filtrate, and in the peritubular capillary we have the blood. So along the way you are going to be exchanging things, okay? Things that you want to add to your urine, right? Perhaps some waste product that you missed initially here, and then you're going to be taking some things back as well. You might have lost some nutrients here that you want to take back. So the entire nephron is basically going to be a finely controlled exchange of material between the blood and the filtrate. Okay, so by having the peritubular capillary right next to the nephron, you are able to do the exchange quite quickly. So eventually, the peritubular capillary is gonna come back and join with this one that runs parallel to the CRA. So this one is the CRV, right? Cortical radial vein, and from the cortical radial vein, right? You will go back to the RQA vein, right? And finally, the interlobar vein. Right? So let me label those for you. Number 7 is RQA vein, and then interlobar vein. And then from the interlobar vein, it's just going to go back out of the kidney through the renal vein. Okay, so there you have it. This is the more complicated nephron. Obviously, I'm not gonna give you this one to label. I guess it's too complicated, but it's a good idea to see what's going on, right? This is the one that you should familiarize yourself with. But this one, if you understand it, then there's gonna be more, more understanding to it, I guess. Right? That's it for this clip.